Welcome to another episode of my weekly podcast, Later That Same Life. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and each week a topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 7, Chapter 4.
8 billion people.
On November 15th, 2022, we lived yet another historic moment in the world's existence. On that day, according to a United Nations report, the population of the planet hit 8 billion people. I'm not sure what degree of accuracy their predictive methods have, but let's assume they were pretty close, and that on November 15th, we officially were a world citizenry of 8 billion. I think they should have picked one person and declared them number 8 billion. You know how they do with the New Year's baby? However, given the difficulty of that designation on a global basis, here's what they should have done. Declare one baby from each of 6 continents the possible 8 billionth person. It would be pretty cool for those 6 people to grow up knowing that one of them contributed to world history. Each kid could get a framed certificate of authentication and, a nice UN gift bag. And that could include a t-shirt, a scented candle, some IHOP coupons, maybe a lifetime bus pass. Come on, United Nations, get on the ball. You missed an opportunity here. You know, UN, if you need a good promo marketing guy, I am available, as long as I can work from home. Oh, and by the way, I know that I said 6 continents, and there are 7, but number 7, Antarctica, has no permanent human habitation. They don't have a government or a capital, no cities or towns at all, for that matter. So technically, they are a continent, but to me that designation, it's like Pluto being a planet. Tenuous at best, and we can yank the ranking anytime we want. And there'd be no one there to object. 8 billion people, wow. How do we even comprehend that? I know, let's use some of those metaphors that the lazy news reporters always use. The ones that we can't possibly relate to. You know the ones. 8 billion. That's enough to fill 2.3 million Olympic swimming pools. Nah, that's not good. Enough to fill 570,000 football fields. 8 billion, that's like 3,200 Houston, Texases. Oh, I don't know, it's 8 billion people. It's a lot. The thing is, the Earth is not getting more crowded, per se. Not as a planet, it isn't. What's getting more crowded are the already crowded places. Almost 40% of the Earth's people live on about 4% of the Earth's surface. Let that sink in for a minute. 40% of all people are crowded into a very small space, which of course means that there are places on this planet where you simply cannot get a pizza delivered in under 30 minutes. Now, of course, the Earth's surface is made up of various topographies, terrains, temperatures, and threats. It's why we don't have massive cities on frozen tundra, metropolises on mountain peaks, sprawling suburbs on the Sahara, and again, Antarctica. No permanent human habitation at all. Did you know in Antarctica you can only order frozen pizza? Okay, but seriously. Over time, we humans have found almost every bit of inhabitable land and moved in. And then as we grew, we also bulldozed, paved, deforested, and otherwise altered uninhabitable surface to put up some bungalows. As that real estate dwindled, we went skyward, enclosing cubic feet of air in concrete, steel, glass, and drywall, calling them apartments and condos. We live in floodplains, tornado alleys, hurricane regions, 'cause we're people. We've taken over the planet, and we gotta live somewhere. It's only logical that as the population grows, it's the crowded places that become more crowded. Here's what I mean. Science can create a human being without having to send two people out for dinner and drinks. For example, I was created in a lab. Both of my parents were scientists and they had sex at work. But today, science can create babies on their own. Despite that, most people are born as a result of two other people having got together. So the more people you already have crammed together, the more likely it is that they will get together. Jane and Tommy sitting in a tree. Kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage, then comes Jane with a baby carriage. And that was an excerpt from a medical reproduction journal. Well, not really. And by the way, I get that that's an old song probably written by heterosexual white people. Times have changed. But by and large, and not discounting the by or the large, that's how we got to 8 billion. Crowds of people breed crowds of people. Like if you're a Unabomber isolated in a shack in the woods, you're probably not thinking, how come I can't meet someone? $8 billion. Seems like only yesterday we were 7 billion. Well, it was, kinda. A similar UN report was made in 2011. 2011, we hit 7 billion humans. It took just over a decade to add another billion. You know what those rich guys say, right? The first billion is always the toughest. Yeah, I hear you, brother. But it's kind of the same with population growth. It took most of human history for us to become a planet of 1 billion people. We reached that global populace mark in the early 1800s. The early 1800s. The age of wide open spaces and unexplored territory. Must have been nice. Think about that. It took humans over 300,000 years to become 1 billion strong. Then after that, it took about another 123 years for us to reach 2 billion. Then 33 more years to reach 3 billion. Now, if you can't flip the calendar fast enough to keep up, let me help. 1960. 1960 is when we hit 3 billion. Diefenbaker was Canada's Prime Minister. JFK was just elected President. Cassius Clay won his first professional fight. Almost every home had a TV, and we were 3 billion people on Earth. By the time Nixon resigned, 1974, we were 4 billion. 5 billion by 1987. And by the way, that year, each of those 5 billion people ended up buying a copy of the Bad album by Michael Jackson. 6 billion people partied like it was 1999, because that's the year when we reached that mark. As I mentioned, 7 billion by 2011, and now 8 near the end of 2022. Crazy, huh? 300,000 years, millennia upon millennia to get to 1 billion. And then about 200 years to get to 8 billion. But as I said, the math makes sense because people beget people. I think the word is exponential. Also, it took almost 50 years to double up to 8 billion from 4. Since 1960, when we had 3 billion, we have settled into a pattern where approximately every dozen years or so, we add another billion people. That makes sense too. The 60s were when we started to talk about the population explosion and how we all had to be a little bit more socially responsible. There was Planned Parenthood, birth control, and even abortion rights. So concerned about overpopulation was China that they not only instituted a one-child policy, but they wrote it into their constitution. That was relaxed to a 2-child, now a 3-child policy, only very recently. What I'm saying is that those of us who are already here put in a pretty good effort trying to curb the number of people that we might make for our own amusement, who would then also be here. The rate of population growth has actually lessened since 1960. Still, we have a lot of people. Interestingly, in this latest UN report, though global life expectation is expected to increase from age 73 to age 77 by 2050, they say that the population growth rate is expected to slow in the coming decades. So much so, according to this latest report, that we will peak as a world population by around 2080 at 10.4 billion people. And that number will remain steady and level well into the year 2100. Does that sound right? Geez, I hope so. Because it seems like if we can be 8, we could be 10.4 without complete disaster. Well, climate change, yes, but I'll get to that. But I think we could exist as 10.4 billion people. It will be slightly tougher to get a seat on the bus at rush hour, but by then we also might spread out a little. This UN report also calls population growth a medical success story. Well, there's also that way of looking at it. We live longer, and not only that, 60 is the new 40. Woohoo! However, if we keep on this pattern of adding a billion people every dozen years or so, how are we going to peak at 10.4 billion by 2080? Well, here's the deal. Birth rates are going down. They have been going down consistently since the baby boom. In this century alone, the birth rate goes down between 1 and 2% every year. That may not sound like much, but 1 or 2% of 8 billion, well, what a crowd. So it's like the UN is predicting that we will hit a critical mass population of 10.4 bill, then a long period of time where birth rate and death rate will be the same annually. I guess that's possible. Mathematicians and demographers are saying so. This is all, of course, barring any unforeseen circumstances, or even the foreseen ones, like the one I just mentioned, climate change. The very industrial age that helped take us from 1 billion to 8 billion in a mere 2 centuries could be the same age that wipes us out back to a much smaller number in a much shorter time. I accept that to be true. And to all climate change deniers, I say, just wait until denial is no longer a river in Egypt. Instead, it's a long and winding bed of cracking clay. There is a bitter irony to the fact that all those things that got us to 8 billion human beings are the same things that could make us almost extinct. We are already an endangered species in many ways. We're the most cognitive animal on the planet without the smarts, or at least the long-term vision, to institute our own system of checks and balances, especially into every new thing we do or try. You know, even this latest one where everybody's talking about the downside, the evils of interconnection and social media. Boy, we never saw that coming. Well, maybe. But you might have seen it coming had you even looked in the first place. And as always, some did see it coming. Not naysayers or doom and gloomers, but people looking forward to a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. But there's a signpost up ahead, and they warned of the Twilight Zone. Well, as I've said before, those voices often drowned out by the din of cash registers. I guess today it's more like the constant beeping of 8 billion people tapping their cards. Quick side story of how so many of us got here. This will have to be the super short version. It's about a man who may have been directly responsible for the lives of about 4 billion people on Earth. He was the 1918 winner of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, but we'll start a little bit earlier in the 1890s. Remember, the world was steady at about 1 billion people. But even then, with the 1 billion, a noted British chemist had a dire warning. He said in 30 years, this is the 1890s, in 30 years' time, the population of the world could starve to death. There's just not enough food, and we can't seem to make it fast enough to sustain ourselves. Quick lesson, we need nitrogen to live. We get nitrogen from plants and from animals that eat plants. When you harvest a crop on the same land over and over, you eventually harvest out all the nitrogen, and crops can't grow. Meanwhile, there's lots of nitrogen in our air, but not in a form that plants and animals can use it. If you could only break apart the nitrogen components from the air and put it back into the soil, more crops, more food, more animals, more humans. Thing is, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to break apart nitrogen components, more than was available at the time. Along came a German chemist, Fritz Haber. He figured it out. It took years, but he did. Basically, he came up with ammonia, ammonium nitrate, fertilizer, a way to harvest bountiful nitrogen and put it back in the soil. Saved the world. Fritz Haber, genius. And how is it that the man responsible for at least half of the population of the earth is not a household name? Well, we also know the explosive properties of ammonium nitrate. We only have to go back to Beirut in 2020. But about a century before that, it was also World War I. Fritz Haber's work was converted to making explosives for the German war effort. Haber also invented a chlorine gas that the German military used to kill thousands in the trenches. He eventually formed a company that invented another deadly gas that years later Hitler used in the Holocaust. So by the time Fritz Haber was honored with the 1918 Nobel Prize for his food-replenishing work, his war efforts took over his reputation. Others boycotted or returned their own awards. There were scathing editorials in North American newspapers. Fritz Haber. Look him up and check out the rest of his story, heroic and tragic existence. I mean, chances are that if Fritz Haber didn't figure it out, someone else might have. But fate fell on Fritz. And it's just another dichromatic tale in the human evolution. 8 billion people. As the UN says, a success story of human health, medicine, invention. But at this point, we really don't know if our story will have a sad or happy ending. Don't ask me why, but I think we'll make it to that 10.4 billion and stay around that figure until 2100. I just think we will. I mean, by then there may be oceanfront property in Manitoba. Western and Central Europe may have burned down. But also by then maybe Antarctica will be warm enough to support some of us. Might be a little chilly, but as long as there's a Walmart and Amazon delivers, Antarctica. 8 billion people. How do we relate to that number? What does it mean? What does it mean to us right now? Well, as I mentioned, almost 40% live on less than 4% of our surface. The two largest landmass countries in the world, Russia and Canada, we have about 2.5% of the world's population. Well, what else we got here? Of 8 billion people, only about 12.5% are Catholic. Nearly 3 times that amount are on Facebook. Up until September, 90% of the entire world had known no other British monarch other than Elizabeth II. 10% of the world is over 70, and about 15% under 18. And of that 15%, 100% do not visit their grandparents enough. About 37% of the Earth's people live under an autocratic regime. Only 6% live in a full democracy. The rest under hybrid or outright sham democracies. You know, like 90% of Russians voted for Putin. Wow, he must be so popular. The most populated cities in the world are Tokyo, Delhi, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, and Mexico City. Rounding out the top 10 are Cairo, Dhaka, Mumbai, Beijing, and Osaka. Over 250 million people live in those 10 cities alone. Well, some of them live alone. I'm sure others are in relationships. Almost 60% of the world lives in an urban area. I can see that. We're not only social beings, we're socioeconomic. The number of men versus women on the planet is split almost equally. Although I believe that stat is based on body parts at birth and not how people identify. The most common birth month, by the way, is September, virtually tied with August. That also makes sense to me. That signifies a December conception. A lot of the world is cold in December, staying inside and cuddling. We all know what cuddling leads to. Plus, a lot of people have December happy holidays. A lot of joy being spread. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Know what I mean? I think you do. Least people born in December and Jan and Feb. More people die in January than any other month. Although in North America, at least, July is the highest month for preventable deaths. So, wear a life jacket. 8 billion people, and did you know no two people on Earth have the exact same eye color? Your eyes are completely unique to you. Well, I could go on with the data like this forever. It's fun, but the big number that we started with, 8 billion. Planet Earth, 8 billion humans. Congratulations to ourselves. And how do so many people fit on a flat Earth without someone falling off the edge? Or is it that they do, but it's never reported by the fake news? 8 billion also includes all those beings from other planets currently masquerading as humans. Trump family, Kardashians, Pierre Poilievre, entire counties in Florida, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Aaron Judge, Usain Bolt, Meghan Markle, Kim Jong-un, Pope Francis.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.